Imagine that fake police officers have come to your house and are ready to take everything you own. But you are a former Marine, and you are not afraid of them or their plans. This man isn't just defending his ranch. He's challenging the fake cops who didn't know who they were dealing with. You wouldn't believe what happened next when these fake cops met a man whose only goal is to protect his land at all costs. Post in the comments, where are you watching from? John McAllister had always believed that life on the open range offered a freedom and simplicity that the bustling cities could never provide. A former U.S. Marine hardened by duty and tempered by valor, John now lived a peaceful, solitary life on his sprawling ranch nestled in the sunburned foothills of California's vast countryside. Every morning, as the delicate blush of dawn crept over the horizon, John would rise with the certainty of a man who knew the value of discipline and self-reliance. He sipped his black coffee on the wraparound porch of his humble farmhouse, watching as the light played over acres of dry, yet resilient, sagebrush and mesquite trees that had witnessed decades of history. For John, these lands were more than just property. They were his sanctuary, a testament to the sacrifices he made for his country, and a living reminder that true freedom was earned through hard work and unyielding principles. It was on a particularly hot afternoon, when the desert winds stirred dust across his property, that an unusual convoy of vehicles rumbled up the long gravel driveway leading to the homestead. John, polishing the worn leather of his old service coat as he leaned against a rusty pickup truck outside his barn, noticed the arrival of several unmarked vans. They bore a professional insignia, the emblem of an organization that, on paper, seemed legitimate: the Home Owners Association, HOA. Normally, such visitors were rare, even unwelcome, in these isolated parts. Yet, the sudden appearance of individuals dressed in uniforms bearing badges and carrying clipboards immediately set John's instincts on high alert. John's ranch was a modest estate by Californian standards, but for him it was everything. A patch of rugged land where he could tend cattle, ride his old horse along dusty trails, and spend quiet evenings under a star-strewn sky. Neighbors in the nearby town recognized John as a man of few words yet strong convictions, a man who, even after his service in the Marines, had never lost his sense of duty to protect what was rightfully his. His reputation for honesty and a no-nonsense approach to life was well known. He believed deeply in property rights and personal responsibility. Visitors to his ranch always found him ready to lend a hand or share a story of past adventures, though it was evident that serenity was what he valued most about his current life away from conflict. As the vans parked near his farmhouse, a group of men in dark uniforms stepped out, their expressions solemn and their posture stiff with feigned authority. One man, a middle-aged fellow with a clipboard clutched in one hand and a badge in the other, cleared his throat and said in a measured tone, "Good afternoon, sir. We're here on behalf of the Home Owners Association. We have been informed that you are in violation of certain community regulations that govern property upkeep in this area. Unfortunately, these violations could subject you to fines, and in extreme cases, even lead to the confiscation of your property." John regarded them coolly, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. He had dealt with bureaucrats before, back in the Marines and later during the transition to civilian life, but something about this encounter felt off. The men's speech and mannerisms carried an air more reminiscent of a petty raid than a legitimate administrative visit. "Violations, you say?" John asked slowly. His voice was calm yet firm, a tone honed by years of commanding respect without raising his voice. "I've lived on this ranch all my life. I always take care to maintain my property as required. Now, if you could kindly specify which rules you claim I have broken, I'd be more than willing to review them." The uniformed visitors exchanged glances, and after a brief, almost rehearsed pause, one of them produced a set of documents from his folder. They looked official enough at first glance. Pages stamped with what appeared to be an HOA seal, signatures that mimicked bureaucratic authenticity, and several lines of fine print that imposed strict directives upon property owners. The man continued, "According to these documents, you have neglected certain maintenance standards mandated by the association. We must insist that you come with us for a formal inspection of your property." John took the papers slowly, his experienced eyes scanning the contents with the deliberate scrutiny of a man who had seen and questioned far more than bureaucratic red tape in his time. Almost immediately, his gut, honed by years on the battlefield, flagged something as amiss. "I appreciate your concern," he said, his voice measured, "but I'm afraid I must verify the authenticity of these documents. They don't quite adhere to the format I'm accustomed to from my time handling official orders." His tone was not accusatory, but it carried an undeniable edge of caution. The group, caught off guard by his calm defiance, shifted uncomfortably. Their confident facade began to crumble as one of them mumbled about protocols and the urgency of the situation. John's eyes, reflecting quiet determination and a lifetime of resolve, scanned the horizon as he gestured toward his property. "If you have any legitimate business regarding this property," he added, "I assure you that I have nothing to hide. But if you're here to harass me with bogus claims, I warn you, these grounds are protected, and I intend to defend them with everything I've got." It was then, as the tension in the humid afternoon reached a palpable peak, that John noticed subtle inconsistencies in the men's credentials and their hesitant glances at one another. His military instincts, trained to detect even the smallest sign of dishonesty or threat, screamed that something was not right. In that moment, the calm pastoral life he had so carefully cultivated on his ranch was abruptly disturbed by the shadow of deceit. The fake HOA officers were not here to enforce rules. They were here to seize his land under false pretenses. John's eyes hardened. His stance shifted from a relaxed rancher to that of a battle-hardened veteran ready to defend his legacy. In the silence that fell between their exchanged words, John mentally prepared himself, drawing upon the reservoir of discipline, skill, and valor that had carried him through years of service in the Marines. He would not allow these pretenders to undermine the sanctity of his property. His voice, now resolute and commanding, broke the standoff. "I suggest you leave immediately, or face the consequences of trespassing on my land." The fake officers, now visibly unsettled by his unwavering resolve and the certainty in his tone, hesitated. Whether by design or by doubt creeping in from their own misgivings, the visitor's confidence began to waver. John's stance, reminiscent of a seasoned Marine ready to fight for his country, sent a clear message. He was no ordinary target. It was clear that this encounter was more than a simple visit from the HOA. It was a challenge, a test of John's vigilance and a deliberate act of deception aimed at robbing him of what he'd spent years earning. And in that moment, as the afternoon sun dipped lower over the rugged California landscape, John McAllister stood unwavering, the embodiment of a man whose honor and expertise would be called upon to protect his cherished ranch at all costs. In the tense aftermath of that heated confrontation, as the late afternoon sun dipped below the rugged California horizon, John McAllister retreated to his small, weathered office in the ranch house. The echoes of his firm warning, "I suggest you leave immediately or face the consequences," still rang in his ears. In the immediate silence that followed the fake officers' hasty retreat back to their vans, John's mind raced with questions. His instincts, refined over years of military service, had already alerted him to dishonesty. The documents they thrust at him bore subtle inconsistencies. The seal felt off, the signature skewed, and the language seemed less law than a watery imitation of governmental formality. His Marine training had taught him to trust nothing at face value, and as he flipped through the papers by the light of a solitary desk lamp, doubts clouded every printed word. John wasn't one to be easily intimidated. Having seen countless attempts by bureaucrats to control property and lives, he knew that when impostors came calling, every minute counted. Silent determination filled him. He decided that before taking any immediate action such as calling the real HOA or law enforcement, he needed to gather enough evidence to expose the impostors for what they were, a group of fraudsters trying to rob him of his hard-earned land. With his past etched into his heart by the discipline and tactics of the Marine Corps, John knew that meticulous observation was the first step in dismantling their plan. That very night, under a quilt of midnight stars and with the cool desert air lulling the vast ranch into a deceptive calm, John mounted his trusted 4x4 pickup. He drove slowly along the long, dusty access road that wound past the perimeter of his property. A natural, unmonitored corridor that provided him with an ideal vantage point to observe anyone approaching. Eyes keen from years of surveillance in hostile environments, he scanned the dark silhouettes of the unmarked vans parked in a nearby clearing. His gut told him that these men had not come as legitimate representatives of the HOA. The fact that they had been so reluctant to present verifiable credentials, and the timidity in their eyes when he mentioned authentic documents, only deepened his suspicions. John began by noting the exact time that the vans arrived and recorded details about their vehicles, their make, model, and any visible logos or markings that might betray their true affiliation. Every detail was committed to memory, and he even scribbled quick notes in his well-worn journal, a habit from his early days in the service when accurate situational reports had been a matter of survival. As the night deepened, he decided to park his truck at a discreet distance and linger, his eyes fixed on the dark silhouettes of men shifting about near one of the vans. The impostors furtively huddled together, whispering in low voices that chilled him. Though the conversation was too soft for him to decipher each word, he caught fragments, mentions of seizing assets, quick payment, and no one will suspect a thing. These snippets added to his growing certainty. These men were not legitimate enforcers of any homeowners association rule. Their plan was far grimmer, a robbery masked under the guise of bureaucratic pressure. John's mind raced as he mentally replayed his time in the Marines, recalling the countless hours spent learning to read subtle body language and discern hidden agendas in enemy patrols. The impostors were like a small detachment of saboteurs, relying on intimidation and the veneer of legal authority to gain access to what they coveted most. His ranch, a sacred legacy of sweat, honor, and self-reliance. Moving silently in the darkness, he took note of every faltering step, every furtive glance exchanged among them. Each movement confirmed what he had already concluded. These were not HOA officials but scammers using fabricated documents to justify an unlawful seizure of his property. Before heading back to his house, John managed to capture a few clandestine photos with his old digital camera. Images that documented the vehicles parked in suspicious formation, the details on the makeshift badges they wore, and even the shady conversation held under the dim glow of a stray street lamp. He planned to take these images to someone with real authority later, but for now, his objective was clear. Gather the undeniable evidence needed to expose these criminals and protect his land at all costs. Once back in the sanctity of his porch and with the chill of night giving way to the promise of impending dawn, John sat on his weathered rocking chair and reviewed his findings. The evidence was mounting, coherent, and testament to a premeditated scheme. His mind, still alert and methodical from countless missions in hostile territories, began to formulate a plan. He would not allow himself to be caught off guard. Instead, he would use his extensive training to turn the tables, ensuring these fraudsters learned that his property was not for the taking without a fight. As the first hints of sunrise tinted the sky with soft hues of gold and pink, John resolved to continue monitoring their movements over the next few days. Each new piece of information would reinforce his determination, and every observation would help him build a strategy to safeguard the only home he had ever truly known. His resolve was clear. If these impostors dared to return, they would be met with a level of preparedness and tactical prowess that only a battle-hardened Marine-turned-rancher could muster. Unknown to the crooks lurking in the shadows, John McAllister had already set in motion a counteroffensive, a silent, vigilant watch over his beloved land. And as the new day unfolded, the quiet ranch would soon become a battleground where deceit met unwavering resolve. That night, as darkness cloaked the expansive ranch in a veil of shadows, John McAllister couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the impersonators were part of something far more sinister than he had initially assumed. With his journal and digital camera securely in hand, he retreated indoors, his mind buzzing with questions. In the quiet of his office, a small room lined with faded maps of the property, military memorabilia, and worn books on tactics, John spread out the documents the impostors had left behind. Their papers, supposedly representing the homeowners association, were filled with inconsistencies. Uneven margins, misspelled words, and seals that looked hastily printed rather than embossed. Every detail deepened his suspicion that these HOA officers were nothing more than fraudulent pretenders. John's Marine training kicked in as he meticulously examined every piece of evidence. He circled the documents with a sharp pencil, cross-referencing dates and comparing the logos to examples he'd seen on legitimate HOA notices in his community. His experienced eyes caught the smallest telltale sign, a watermark that was faint or completely missing, mismatched fonts, and signatures that lacked the fluidity typical of official correspondence. Even the uniforms the men wore, which were meant to denote authority, seemed off. The badges were cheaply made replicas, the fabric of their shirts ill-cut, and the manner in which they carried themselves far too rehearsed. It was clear that these impostors were well aware of the power of symbolism. They had attempted to harness it, but the poor execution left them open to scrutiny. Unable to rest on mere suspicion, John decided to dig deeper. He recalled fragments of the conversation he had overheard from his concealed vantage point earlier that night. Hidden behind an outbuilding near the roadside, he'd listened carefully as the men huddled with furtive voices and exchanged curt words about seizing assets, quick payment before the next move, and using the ranch as leverage. These snippets hinted not at bureaucratic enforcement, but at a planned criminal venture aimed at confiscating property by force and intimidation. His pulse quickened as the pieces of the puzzle started aligning. A meticulously planned attempt to prey on the vulnerabilities of property owners in remote areas, using bogus authority as a front. John's next step was to gather more concrete evidence. He loaded his digital camera with fresh batteries and, with his eyes fixed on the dark horizon, decided to return to the anomaly spot near the vans. Parking his 4x4 a little farther from the convoy's usual meetup point, he stealthily observed the impostors as they subtly regrouped near a cluster of trees. In the sparse light of a half-moon, he snapped several photos of their vehicles, capturing close-ups of license plates, the eavesdropping glances they exchanged, and even the threads of their uniforms. He noted down vehicle models, color details, and distinctive markings that might later be cross-referenced with any known criminal databases, even if only on an informal level. John's instincts told him that this was a larger ring at work, one preying on unsuspecting property owners across the region. Before the night was through, John made a quiet call to an old friend from his post-Marine days, Sam Alvarez, who had since become an independent security consultant with a reputation for investigating local fraud and organized crime. In a low, measured tone that conveyed both urgency and trust forged over shared experiences, John relayed the details of the encounter. "Sam, something doesn't add up," he said, his voice steady despite the underlying tension. "I've got documents that look like official HOA notices, but they're clearly forgeries. Those men, my gut tells me they're planning something big. They mentioned seizing assets and acting quickly. I need you to look into this before they try anything on my property, or worse, on someone else's." Sam promised to check his sources and warned John to remain vigilant, hinting that similar tactics had been reported in other nearby ranches. Armed with both his own observations and the promise of Sam's expertise, John embarked on a methodical investigation over the ensuing days. By daylight, he re-examined the initial documents under a magnifying glass, verifying every detail and noting discrepancies that confirmed his suspicions. He compared font sizes, ink quality, and even the paperweight with standard HOA documents obtained from the local county office. Every anomaly reinforced that the papers were not authentic. Meanwhile, he discreetly patrolled the boundaries of his property, scanning for any unusual activity, and noting any unregistered vehicles that might be associated with the impostors. John's nights took on a new ritual. With practiced caution, he would stealthily move along the perimeter in darkness, his senses honed by decades of training. There was one particular night when, after hearing the faint hum of approaching engines, he set up a temporary observation post behind his barn. Hidden behind a stack of hay bales and a rusted pickup, he watched as one of the vans rolled slowly down a side road. With military precision, he activated his camera's zoom function to capture the license plate still glowing in the dim light. Every detail was vital. Each piece of evidence would serve to expose the criminals once he had enough proof to take effective countermeasures. During one of his midnight observations, John overheard a hushed conversation among the fakers that confirmed his worst fears. He caught snippets of plans that included specific times, precise entry points, and a mention of making use of the confusion during the day to get past vigilant property owners. The plan wasn't merely to harass him with paperwork. It was a full-blown robbery designed to exploit the prestige of the HOA name to break into his ranch during a lull in activity. It became clear that they intended to strike soon, using his own land as a staging ground for a more extensive theft operation. Now armed with damning evidence, blatant forgeries, photographic documentation of suspicious vehicles and uniforms, and overheard plans, John felt the weight of his responsibility intensify. This was no longer a matter of safeguarding his property. It was about preempting a criminal enterprise that desecrated the sanctity of honest homeownership. Every article in his journal, every silent photograph captured under moonlight, and every whispered intelligence from his late-night reconnaissance solidified his resolve. John McAllister, the steadfast ex-Marine, was not about to let these pretenders trample on the blood, sweat, and honor that had built his life. As dawn promised a new day over the rugged Californian landscape, John sat back on his creaking porch steps, reviewing his compiled evidence with steely determination. The path ahead was clear. He would prepare for the inevitable confrontation by turning his knowledge and instincts into a robust defense for his ranch. Whatever foul scheme these impostors had devised, John was ready. His next steps would involve setting up countermeasures and ensuring that if they dared return, they would meet resistance unlike anything they had anticipated. In the quiet hours following his discovery of the impostors' plan, John McAllister knew that every moment counted. His mind raced back to grueling days spent in the Marines, where the cost of inaction was measured in lives. Now, alone on his cherished ranch, he had no choice but to marshal every ounce of his discipline and expertise to safeguard his land from deceitful intruders. The evidence he'd collected, the counterfeit documents, the grainy photos of shady vans, and the overheard whispers of a criminal agenda, served as a stark reminder. These impostors were not merely bureaucrats with forged badges, but criminals whose eyes were set on plundering his hard-fought legacy. As twilight faded into the deep blue of night, John retreated into the solitude of his modest home, where the ambience was punctuated by the soft hum of an old radio and the distant rustle of desert wind across his property. Sitting at a weathered wooden desk cluttered with maps of his sprawling ranch, a notebook filled with tactical observations, and a pair of well-worn binoculars, he began meticulously planning his defense. Every detail was scrutinized. Every potential vulnerability was noted. Memories of past missions resurfaced, silent nights broken only by strategic whispers among comrades, and he recalled once again that thorough preparation was the soul of victory. John's first order of business was to secure his immediate perimeter. He roamed the boundaries of his property at dawn, armed not only with his trusty Colt handgun but also with the keen instincts honed during years of surveillance and field operations. He inspected every gate, every break in the fence, and every shaded outbuilding that could offer cover to intruders. Any gap, however insignificant, was patched up with a sense of urgency. He reinforced the old wooden fence with additional steel links salvaged from his garage and double-checked the locks on his barn doors and shed windows. His hands worked with a precision that mirrored those long hours spent defusing potential threats during his service. Next, John turned his attention to surveillance. He wasn't a man accustomed to modern digital technology, but he knew enough to rig up a rudimentary system using motion detector lights and a few spare cameras he had once used for hunting. He strategically installed these devices along the main access road to his ranch and near the less visible corners around his home, places where the impostors might attempt to approach undetected. Hidden behind rusted barrels and piles of hay, these inconspicuous sentinels would provide him with critical early warning. He set their angles meticulously, ensuring that every inch of the perimeter was covered, so that even in the darkness, any footsteps or moving silhouettes would be captured and outlined against the starry night. Determined to turn the terrain itself into his ally, John began constructing a series of improvised obstacles. Drawing on lessons learned from amphibious assaults and jungle ambushes, he identified natural choke points on his property, narrow paths between rock outcroppings and dense groves of scrub oak. In these areas, he installed tripwires fashioned from fishing line and barbed wire, rigged to trigger alarms that he could hear through an old, modified two-way radio system on his desk. He also set up decoy projects, abandoned equipment left in plain sight to mask true strategic installations, and even a few strategically placed sandbags that could slow down any advance. Each trap was a small tribute to the meticulous care of an ex-Marine, designed to delay, disorient, and even deter anyone foolish enough to trespass. While John worked on fortifying his external defenses, he also reviewed everything he knew about the impostors from his nightly reconnaissance. He reread his notes accompanying the photos and observed the patterns in their behavior. They seemed to operate with a degree of coordination that was alarmingly professional, yet their work was marred by the sloppy details of their forged credentials. He scribbled down alternative scenarios in his notebook, how many of them would be involved, which vehicles were most likely to be leading, and what their next move might be. He even practiced running through potential engagement scenarios in the isolation of his barn, his mind mentally rehearsing drills and countermeasures from his training days. Every muscle in his body, every nerve, was primed for a confrontation he knew was inevitable. To further tip the scales in his favor, John activated a mental call to an old friend, a fellow veteran turned independent security specialist. Over a crackling, secure phone line, he outlined his suspicions and the mounting evidence, asking for any pieces of intelligence that might clarify the scope of this fraudulent operation. The response was terse. The friend confirmed that similar scams had been reported in other rural counties, focusing on landowners who prided themselves on self-reliance and independence. This affixed John's determination even more firmly. He was not alone in facing this deceit, and together, communities might one day form a network to combat such exploitative schemes. But for now, his battle was his own. As night deepened, John retreated momentarily indoors to check his assembled gear. A set of binoculars, a fully charged flashlight, extra batteries, and a scavenged military knife whose handle bore the scars of previous battles. He reviewed a mental checklist. Secure the perimeter, monitor for any abnormal activity, and wait with unwavering patience for the impostors to show themselves once more. Every detail of his strategy was etched into his memory, a strategic blueprint fueled by both vigilance and the unyielding pride of a man who had fought for his country and now fought for his home. In the dim light of his living room, with the old clock ticking steadily on the wall, John allowed himself a rare moment to reflect on the sanctity of his land. This wasn't just property. It was the manifestation of his years of sacrifice, a tangible piece of freedom that he had earned through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to honor. Whoever had the audacity to attempt a robbery on his ranch would soon discover that John McAllister was not just a relic of past valor. He was a vigilant guardian whose tactical acumen and indomitable spirit would transform his humble abode into a veritable fortress. As the night wore on, under the silent watch of 1,000 stars, John's resolve only grew stronger. Every detail, every precaution he set in motion, was a promise to himself and to his legacy. He would not allow these fraudulent interlopers to tarnish what was rightfully his. The stage was set, the traps were laid, and in the stillness of the desert night, John stood ready, a man of action waiting to confront deceit with the full force of his lifetime of experience. As the pre-dawn gloom began to shift into the first hints of a weak sunrise, a tension that had been simmering through the long, dark hours finally exploded into action. John McAllister sat alert on his porch, his eyes scanning the horizon with the sharp focus of a man trained to see through the veil of night. The silence of the desert had been heavy with anticipation, and now, like the distant grumble before a violent storm, the sound of low engines rolling over the gravel reached his ears. From his vantage point near the fortified western boundary, John saw movement, the clustered silhouettes of the impostors emerging from the cover of a nearby grove. Their approach was resolute and calculated, as if they were following a predetermined schedule, one that John had predicted down to the minute. Dressed in dark, ill-fitting uniforms with their makeshift badges still clutched in trembling hands, the fraudulent police had advanced along a side path leading straight to one of the newly reinforced access gates. Their voices, in a hushed yet firm tone, were barely audible over the soft rumble of their engines. John's heart thundered, but his face remained impassive. Every second of his training and every detail of his fortifications converged into this critical moment. Immediately, the system he painstakingly set up began to spring into action. Hidden motion detectors along the fence stiffened and beeped in a dissonant chorus, their red indicator lights piercing the pre-dawn dark. At the sound of the alarms, John pressed a button on his old two-way radio, transmitting a succinct message to his friend Sam Alvarez, though he already suspected that any law enforcement intervention would likely be too late to thwart the imminent breach by these self-appointed marauders. Unbeknownst to the infiltrators, John's defenses were not merely an arrangement of lights and cameras. They were layered obstacles designed to delay and disorient the attackers. As the impostors neared the fence, a discreet tripwire, cleverly strung between two rusted barrels, suddenly vibrated at the slightest touch. One of the fraudsters, stepping too close in his haste, triggered the contraption. A series of loud, jarring clatters rang out as a carefully rigged cascade of small metal objects rattled to the ground. The unexpected noise sent a ripple of panic through their formation. His partner cursed under his breath, and then another impostor, trying to ease his companion, inadvertently disturbed a second trap, a net rigged from old barbed wire that sprang upward, tangling one of them in its unforgiving mesh. Chaos erupted. The fake police scattered in disarray along the side of the fence. Some scrambled behind their vehicles in a vain attempt to regroup, while others tripped over obstacles John had meticulously planted in the narrow, rocky approach. The sound of shouts and the scuffle of hurried footsteps filled the air, mingling with the persistent beeping of motion sensors and the distant cry of an agitated coyote. John didn't wait idly as the intruders' panic rippled through the darkness. With the calm precision of a seasoned Marine, he lifted his binoculars and tracked their movement along the fence line. His mind rapidly evaluated the situation. The impostors were clever enough to have planned for a traditional entry, but his traps had turned their coordinated advance into disjointed chaos. John's muscles tightened around the grip of his Colt handgun, holstered but ready, a silent promise that any further breach would meet with force. In the midst of the disarray, one of the impostors managed to force his way to a side door that led into what John had designated as a secondary vulnerable point near the barn. Sensing an opportunistic breach, John moved swiftly along the perimeter on foot, the dark between the stars and the first light of dawn providing heavy cover for his deliberate, measured strides. Clad in his faded, yet still service-ready, flak jacket, and moving with the stealth taught by years of field operations, he approached the point of entry. From behind a large oak tree, he observed a man fumbling with a set of keys on a tarnished padlock. John's mind raced. If these impostors managed to infiltrate further, they might reach the central barn, invaluable not only in a monetary sense but as the heart of his ranch's livelihood. Without hesitation, John sprang into action. He closed the distance with deliberate speed, catching the intruder completely unaware. In a swift maneuver, he disarmed him of both weapon and ill-gotten tools, pinning the man against the rough bark as he spoke in a low, dangerous tone. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The intruder's eyes widened in a mix of terror and disbelief. His voice stuttered, barely a whisper. I'm with the HOA." John's grip tightened until it was clear that any further words were moot. Simultaneously, at the other end of his property, a burst of commotion startled the remaining impostors once more. Their makeshift operation, built on deceit and forced entry, began to crumble as more traps were triggered and their ranks splintered by miscommunication. Fumbling faces and panicked orders replaced the earlier rigid resolve on their part. John's methodical defense, honed by years of tactical training and an intimate connection to the land, left no room for error. With every shot of his well-aimed warning, non-lethal yet intended to incapacitate, the impostors were pushed back, forced to retreat into the natural concealment of the rugged terrain where their orchestration dissolved into disarray. As the first beams of sunlight managed to pierce the receding darkness, the once organized band of fraudsters was left staggering and scattered, their plans thwarted by a single, determined defender. With a final, authoritative radio call confirming that he had successfully repelled the initial assault, John retraced his cautious steps back to the safety of his homestead. Every trap that had been triggered and every chaotic shout in the night reaffirmed his conviction. His land was not for sale or seizure. His precise countermeasures had thwarted the fraudulent intruders, reminding them and himself that his ranch was a fortress built not only of stone and wire, but of unwavering resolve and the indomitable spirit of a true Marine. The violent clamor of the breach gradually faded into the steady chirrup of early birds, a stark reminder that while the night had borne witness to audacity and deceit, it had also showcased the vigilant courage of a man who would defend his way of life at any cost. In the aftermath of the frantic initial assault, the night remained vibrantly alive with tension. Though the early skirmishes had scattered most of the fraudsters, a determined remnant regrouped along the northern edge of John's property. They gathered near a weathered, abandoned service building, a shadowy spot that they believed provided a clandestine entry point into the heart of the ranch. Their voices, now more urgent and frenzied after the chaos unleashed by John's defensive measures, echoed off the rugged outcroppings of rock and scrub. They huddled together, poring over their counterfeit documents and muttering orders that were as halting as they were desperate. John, perched behind the safety of a reinforced hay bale barrier with his binoculars fixed on the service building, observed every subtle movement. His heart pounded with a mix of controlled adrenaline and the steely resolve of a man who had faced far worse in his military days. He knew all too well that this remnant was willing to risk everything for a chance to seize what they believed was theirs by fraudulent right. Yet, as they whispered hurried plans to disable the door lock and bypass a secondary sensor, one John had purposely positioned to cover that blind spot. The contrast between their amateurish tactics and his own meticulously arranged defenses became even starker. Without a moment's hesitation, John initiated his next phase of action. His fingers danced over the controls on his modified two-way radio as he sent out a terse update to his security ally, Sam Alvarez, though he recognized that immediate help might not come in time. Relying on every bit of training from his days as a U.S. Marine, he planned to transform the intruder's desperate coordination into disarray. Quietly, he moved, a ghost in the pre-dawn gloom, toward a position that allowed him to monitor the service building's entrance from multiple angles. His approach was fluid and determined. Every step was calculated to maximize his cover while not compromising his sightline on the enemy. At exactly that moment, one of the impostors, emboldened by either overconfidence or sheer desperation, advanced from their cover and fumbled with the lock of the service door. The faint click of the tumblers, amplified by the cool, silent night, signaled to John that they were on the brink of an incursion. He swiftly activated one of the last set traps he had rigged, a pressure-sensitive trigger hidden beneath a loose arrangement of gravel near the door. As the intruder's weight shifted with his hurried maneuver, a discreet but well-aimed cascade of noise erupted from a series of small metal cans tied to a thin wire. The sudden clamor startled him, sending him stumbling backward into a sharpened, camouflaged spike strip John had laid out moments earlier in anticipation. An anguished cry cut through the darkness as the intruder fell, his plans abruptly dashed by calculated ingenuity. The reaction was immediate. The remaining impostors, now visibly rattled by the unexpected severity of the countermeasures, attempted to reorganize and pressed forward along the side of the building. But John was relentless. Drawing upon his years of field command, he maneuvered silently from one cover point to another along the fence, his trusty Colt tucked securely by his side. Every step was measured. Every breath was a rehearsal of the tactics he had mastered under fire. As the group edged closer to the weak point of his defenses, John unleashed a sharp, echoing burst of non-lethal rounds from his firearm into the ground between them, a clear and forceful warning. The crisp report of the blank shots reverberated like a clarion call, halting their advance as confusion rippled through their ranks. In that brief, suspended instant, John's dive into close-quarters combat was unstoppable. With the precision of a seasoned Marine executing a well-rehearsed ambush, he advanced toward the floundering attackers. In a blur of tactical movements, he closed the gap between himself and the nearest assailant, whose confused shouts were stifled by John's rapid hand-to-hand control techniques. He pinned the attacker against the rough exterior of the service building, leveraging joint locks and disarming maneuvers that left the man incapacitated before he could even draw a proper weapon. John's eyes, cold and unyielding, met the intruders in a silent warning. I am the guardian of this land. In that moment, the ideals he had embodied in his years of service surged forth, clear as daylight despite the lingering darkness. As the remaining impostors watched their comrades being subdued by John's ferocity, panic grew into a chaotic stampede for cover. The cohesive structure of their ragtag band dissolved immediately. With disorganized footsteps and frantic, disjointed voices competing with the constant hum of the night, they began retreating toward their vehicles. Their ill-preparedness became abundantly evident. The once proud impostors now scattered like leaves before an unyielding storm. John's campaign of delay did not end there. Even as the bulk of the enemy began to retreat, he methodically pursued minor stragglers who dared approach too near the perimeter. In one particularly tense moment, an intruder attempted to rejoin the retreat, only to trip over a concealed tripwire that John had carefully set along a narrow, rocky passage. A loud clatter ensued, and as the interloper struggled to rise, John's rapid response ensured that he was met with a stern, commanding declaration. You will not defile these lands with your treachery. The phrase, soaked in the weight of his years and experiences, echoed in the chill air as the man scurried away into the semi-darkness. By the time the first rays of a pale dawn began to light up the horizon, the remnants of the fraudulent force were nothing more than dispersed shadows retreating into the distance. The once coordinated assault had been shattered by John's unwavering defense and the desperate, clumsy tactics of men who underestimated the resolve of a man who had sworn to protect his home at all costs. The air was filled with the residual static of electronic alarms and the scattered metallic sounds of traps triggered by deliberate precision. Standing alone among the detritus of the night's conflict, John surveyed his property with the tempered calm of a soldier who had won a battle but remained wary of future threats. His ranch, still standing proud under the slowly brightening sky, bore the scars of the frantic assault: trampled gravel, disrupted fences, and the occasional piece of counterfeit documentation fluttering in the light breeze. Yet despite these marks, his land remained unconquered, its spirit unbroken. John holstered his weapon slowly, his eyes scanning the now quiet field. He took a deep, measured breath, allowing the adrenaline to ebb and his mind to settle into a vigilant readiness. On this night, through meticulous planning and the relentless application of military tactics, John had not only repelled the impostors but sent a clear message. His property, his legacy, was inviolable. The echoes of that fervent night would serve as a steadfast reminder to all who dared touch his land. As the pale hues of dawn crept over the Californian horizon, John McAllister surveyed his once chaotic property with a steady, measured gaze. The night's fierce clashes now lay behind him like scattered fragments of a failed ambush. In the aftermath of the turbulent confrontation, the impostors had been thoroughly routed. What had begun as a coordinated assault by fraudulent police masquerading as HOA enforcers had disintegrated into disorganized panic. Their ragtag formation, no match for John's disciplined countermeasures, had retreated into the unforgiving landscape, leaving behind evidence of sabotage and shattered illusions of lawful authority. The decisive clash had reached its climax around the old service building, where John's relentless defense had finally driven his would-be robbers to the brink. With his heart steeled by memories of battles fought on foreign soil, he had engaged them with the precision and cool command typical of his Marine days. The final encounter had been a blur of tactical maneuvers. John had swiftly subdued the last straggler attempting to force his way through a secondary entry point, using a combination of non-lethal force and expert hand-to-hand techniques. As the intruder lay incapacitated at his feet, John caught the faint tremor of fear in the man's eyes, a silent admission that he had met his match. In that split second, John's voice had thundered in the still air. This land is mine, and every inch of it is protected. You have no place here. With the echoes of that declaration still reverberating in the cool morning air, John took a moment to secure the immediate area. He methodically gathered the counterfeit documents, snapped the final pictures with his camera, and cataloged every detail of the impostors' retreat. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only had they forged official papers, but they had dared to assume the authority granted to no one but the true homeowners association. Realizing that this breach was merely one front in a larger scheme targeting independent landowners, John resolved that his vigilance must not wane. Still, for the moment, the battle had turned decidedly in his favor. As the sun rose higher, its light bathed the ranch in a warm glow that seemed to purify the scars of the night. John reached for his old radio. He transmitted a final, curt message to his trusted friend Sam Alvarez, confirming that the hostile elements had been repelled and that his property was temporarily secure. In response, Sam's voice came back with a note of cautious congratulations and a reminder that while this victory was significant, it might only be a prelude to further attempts by those shrouded in deceit. John nodded silently, understanding that the struggle for the sanctity of his homeland was an ongoing battle, not a singular event. Returning to his farmhouse, John paused on his weathered porch, hands resting on the rough-hewn railing, eyes fixed on the vast expanse of his protected land. The scars of the night, trampled gravel, disrupted fences, and the scattered remnants of fake insignia spoke volumes of the fierceness with which he had defended his legacy. Every barrier he had erected, every trap meticulously set, was a testament to a man who had cultivated not only his property but a spirit of unwavering independence. He felt both relief and a renewed sense of caution, for though today he had triumphed, he knew that the unsettled forces of greed and criminality never rested for long. In the coming hours, local authorities would eventually be alerted by the gathered evidence, and an investigation would expose the fraudulent ring preying upon unsuspecting landowners. But for now, John allowed himself a brief respite, savoring the quiet victory as the breeze whispered through the mesquite trees and the gentle chorus of morning birds heralded a new day. His ranch, a living monument to sacrifice and hard-won freedom, remained unviolated, its boundaries secure under the vigilant care of a man who had fought with honor as long as he drew breath. Standing resolute in the soft morning sunlight, John silently vowed that his land would never succumb to the ambitions of those who sought to manipulate and deceive. Every experience in his life had led him to this defining moment, a moment when he stood not only as an owner but as a guardian, a protector whose expertise and integrity defied the bounds of expectation. This is only the beginning of a great battle for his land, but can they handle a man whose skills are second to none? Subscribe to find out how this fight ends, and whether John can restore and preserve his peaceful, free life on the ranch.